What's up, everybody? So I couldn't help myself. Yeah, I finished watching The Saint, and then I did my video and review about it after the passing of Val Kilmer, and then I was just in that mode of Val Kilmer because I grew up with him. As a kid watching movies, and he was always around. So I went back and I watched Batman Forever. It came out in 1995. I was around 14 years old at the time, and since I was always such a huge fan, like I watched Top Gun so many times. I still watch Top Gun on a regular basis, maybe at least once or twice a year. Uh, Other movies that he's been in, like Top Secret, Real Genius, so when I saw that he was going to be Batman, I was like, this is gonna be amazing, and it does not disappoint. You know, I know that since these first iterations of Batman's, we've had a couple other ones. Specifically the Christopher Nolan trilogy. Robert Pattinson is the Batman. We have Ben Affleck as the Batman, and so there's a lot to chew on. There's a lot to critique. But if there's one thing that I remember about Val Kilmer's version of Batman, especially just the movie itself, Batman Forever, it was an event. It was a big, huge thing because the first two Batman movies with Michael Keaton, they were great. I really enjoyed them, but I didn't feel that same kind of maybe competency as Bruce Wayne and Batman from Michael Keaton as I just instinctually did with Val Kilmer. I had seen him be Iceman and kick ass. I had seen him, in other movies where he's just incredibly watchable and charismatic. So somebody of his stature that can go toe to toe with somebody like Tom Cruise, I'm like, that's perfect. That's the kind of guy I want as Batman. Not somebody who at the time I barely kind of heard of. Now, Michael Keaton did a great job as Batman, and he kind of owns that phrase, I am Batman. But just the persona of it, I think Val Kilmer definitely did, one of the best jobs, hands down, for me. Now, another thing that really, really separated Batman Forever from the previous Batman movies is just the star power. So yes, you have Val Kilmer. You also have Jim Carrey, who was just on the come up. You have Tommy Lee Jones, who established actor, Academy Award winning actor at this time, stepping in. Nicole Kidman's star was also just super on the rise. She was just about to break into superstar status. Chris O'Donnell, doing his thing, especially after a few years after coming off of a really serviceable performance with Al Pacino in Scent of a Woman. And so like all these stars just aligned. So it was like a really great ensemble piece, as you can tell by the poster. It was sold as this big event with all these big stars. This is before Ocean's 11 and certainly before, you have all these huge stars in the Marvel movies. And like the world of it, the aesthetic of it completely changed. It's like very dark and gothic and somber, with Batman and Batman Returns, with Tim Burton helming those two films. But with this one, you got Joel Schumacher, and people like to hate on Joel Schumacher because of the campiness of this one, and especially the next one in Batman Forever. I mean Batman and Robin. But you also got to remember, this is the same guy that did A Time to Kill, who did Falling Down. This guy is like a real filmmaker, and I'll put his filmography up against any of the best ones, bar none. Maybe it doesn't reach the level of like Oscar worthy from on a consistent basis, like maybe Spielberg or Scorsese did, but he's definitely one of those guys that cannot be just you can't hate on him just because he made two films that, yes, they're ridiculous on its face, but the level of fun, especially with Batman Forever, is just, it's amazing, And he didn't, as he was promoting this movie, I remember looking it up, and I think it was a Charlie Rose interview, and he referred to this, and this is such a great phrase. He referred to his version of Batman, this movie, as a pop culture opera. I had never heard those combination of words before. Put it like a pop culture opera. Like it does have that grand, big, surrealistic aspect of it. And then when you take, you know, all of these big stars, and even to a certain extent, put the soundtrack in it as well. And it's just a pop culture event. This was huge, huge news and a huge deal in the mid 90s when this movie came out. And, seeing Val Kilmer as Bruce Wayne and Batman, I think his performance is very underrated. His version of Bruce Wayne, I think, is actually the best because I think he was given the most to do, because even though I love Christian Bale, don't get me wrong, and he does an incredible job in those movies, but the problem that always pops up with Batman movies is that the villains are more interesting than the hero. And in this case, it feels like they gave him more of the spotlight. So his trauma with his parents being murdered in front of him, how he's trying to make sense of it with Nicole Kidman's character, and even the chemistry between the two, like it feels real, even though, watching it again, like the dialogue is kind of dumb, a lot of the time, but in those moments where it's just no speaking at all, they're just kind of together and like maybe an almost kiss moment, and like there was definitely something there, which is really interesting to me because at the time she's married to Tom Cruise, and Tom Cruise and Val stayed friends, after Top Gun for years. Even as recently as this past week when he passed away, at CinemaCon, Tom Cruise was like, let's have a moment of silence for Val. So there's still that connection between these two guys. But it's incredible fun. The plot is, who cares? It's Val Kilmer as Batman, it's Jim Carrey, Tommy Lee Jones, and all these people, and this colorful, over-the-top, popcorn fun movie. So I'm not even going to waste anybody's time talking about what it's about. It's Batman, and probably one of the grandest, most epic, most stylistic, most fun Batman movie you will probably ever see. Anyways, what about you guys? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Smash that like button, give me a follow, and I'll see you guys next time.